Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. Well guys, the experiment with streaming didn't quite work out. I certainly tried to make it work out, but it didn't do that. And as a result, I wasn't able to stream the two opening statements today in the Rust trial. But I did record the latter statement, the statement of the defense, and I have a lot to say about that. And so that's what I'm going to do here, and then hopefully we'll be able to pull some other testimony and things away from the trial later on. But today we're going to take a look at the defense opening statement. Before we get to the opening statement, though, I want to go over the rules in an opening statement. Opening statement is just that. It is an opening statement. You're going to tell the jury what you believe the evidence will be. What you cannot do is tell the jury what to think about what the evidence is going to be. So to do that, you are arguing. It is perfectly okay to say the evidence will be that Alec Baldwin pointed this gun at Helena Hutchins and doesn't believe he pulled the trigger, because he might testify, so they might be able to get that evidence in. But what you can't do is you can't lay off onto individuals or basically argue evidence that isn't in yet. What you can do is say what the evidence will be, not what the evidence means. If you're saying what the evidence means, that is argument. Now, a lot of times, in order to let the other guy have a fair shot at what they're doing, a prosecutor or a defense lawyer won't object when it's a minor infraction. I believe that the prosecutor's kind of messed up here by not objecting much more vocally and much more quickly to the defense in this particular case in its argument. I'm going to go through a couple of parts of this opening statement, and I'm going to point out what the argument is. And in many respects, I will be pointing out why the defense is wrong in what they're saying. Hopefully you will find this interesting and helpful. So let's begin.
Good morning. This was an unspeakable tragedy, but Alec Baldwin committed no crime. He was an actor acting, playing the role of Harlan Rust. An actor playing a character can act in ways that are lethal, that just aren't lethal on a movie set. These cardinal rules, they're not cardinal rules on a movie set.
Yes, they are.
I don't
cardinal
have to
rules
tell
everywhere.
you much more about this.
This is
You've
ridiculous.
all seen gunfights in movies.
Yes, where they're pointed
And the
away
reason
from
that
people.
can happen is because safety is ensured before the actor.
No.
On this movie set, there were people
Not true.
responsible for ensuring the safety of the set and the firearm. Those people failed in their duties.
That's
But
true.
Alec Baldwin committed no crime.
Nonsense. He
The most
pointed a
critical
live
issue
weapon.
in this case is how a real bullet got on a movie set.
That statement right there is a red herring. And the reason it's a red herring is because the issue is not how the bullet got into the gun. Every gun that has ever been manufactured that will fire a bullet, in other words, one that is capable of firing a bullet and not an inert gun that doesn't operate, every gun has the capability of firing a projectile out the barrel that will kill someone. And every gun has to be treated like it's loaded at all times. This is something I know a lot about in terms of firearm safety, and the cardinal rules of firearm safety don't change just because you're on a movie set. Just because you're on a movie set doesn't mean that a gun can't kill you. And the reason for that is because people are human beings and human beings make mistakes. And even though you may have multiple levels of safety built in, the person holding the gun is ultimately responsible for what it does. Guns don't kill people. People who handle guns kill people. And as a result, you have to be absolutely certain about what you're doing. You can't point a firearm at a human being and not expect tragedy to ensue. So one of the points that they're making here is, well, we don't know how the live round got into the gun. The police blew the investigation. Well, even if we knew how the live round got into the gun, That might reflect on someone else's culpability, but it doesn't reflect on Baldwin's because he was holding the gun at the time that it was pointed at Helena Hutchins and he pulled the trigger. Now, they will later admit in this opening statement that, he might have been mistaken about that. Maybe he did pull the trigger because, as they showed during the prosecution's opening statement, he had multiple opportunities to pull the trigger because his finger was always in the trigger well.
And they are used for those shooting scenes. And, they'll play these videos that they described of Alex, firearm in the movie going bang poof. And people are conditioned to seeing people firing weapons and thinking, that's a dangerous act. That's a dangerous act.
It is a dangerous act, you moron.
Give you that image to try to tarnish him in your eyes. But that's not
baloney.
What happened here.
They're trying to set
on
it up.
On this set, there was a real bullet. Something that should never be on a movie set.
Hey,
something
we can agree on that.
Nothing to do with making
That's
a movie.
why you always treat them as if they're loaded.
Not one word that Alec Baldwin had anything to do with that real bullet being brought onto that set.
Sorry, when people say stupid things, sometimes I react badly to them, and as you could tell, I definitely reacted badly there. But again, we're back to the red herring. Alec Baldwin had nothing to do with that live round. Well, again, it doesn't matter, because you have to treat every firearm as if it's loaded. Everybody who's ever had any gun safety training knows you don't point a weapon, any weapon, whether you believe it's loaded or unloaded, at a person, because you have to treat them all as always loaded, because the fallout from not doing that can be tragic, as it was in this case.
He did not know or have any reason to know that gun was loaded with a live bullet. That's the key. That live bullet is the key. That is the lethal element. But again, as the prosecutor told you, if they could prove that he intentionally pulled the trigger and he was imperfect, imprecise, wrong with what he said, then maybe you take that and you say he's lying. And if he's a liar, he committed homicide. And so what they do is they take the process.
This is argument. Why are you letting him get this in?
They're blinded by the shine. They're blinded by trying to disprove Alec.
Now that entire segment there where he's talking about being blinded, trying to disprove Alec, all of that is argument. And the prosecution should have been objecting to that, and they should have been doing it all along. And I don't understand why they didn't.
And what they will do is they will tell you, if only we had had a second armorer. One of them will say, if only Dave Halls had checked better. If only the camera hadn't been right there and Miss Hutchins wasn't leaning over the camera. If only I myself did this. If only Alec did that. This is natural, their testimony. It's part of the human condition. It's part of grief.
Objection.
Yes.
None of them knew.
And again, we have the defense attorney telling people what's normal and natural. This is opening statement. You don't get to testify. You don't get to tell people additional facts that you want them to remember when they evaluate the evidence or when they see this testimony come in. You don't want them already dissuaded by the argument portion of the opening statement because, again, that's improper. You bring in the evidence and you argue the evidence later. But he is pre-arguing the evidence because he knows what the evidence is going to be. He isn't telling them what the evidence is. He's telling them how to think about it. He started out by saying this is what they're going to say, and then he's saying this is what it means. Let's see if he cleans it up on the back end. See, this is argument. He is absolutely off base doing this, and he knows it. And I suspect he's going to get rebuked here and told to stop it. It's not proper to argue during opening statement. It's not opening argument. It's opening statement. This is what the evidence is going to be. Unless he has experts that are coming in here to testify to what he just said about the human condition, the jury should be instructed to disregard it.
The witnesses, in their grief, will look for reasons to try to make sense of this tragedy. But again, none of them knew or should have known about the lethal bullet either.
So he did clean it up a little bit in terms of not telling the jury what to think about it. But he's done this over and over throughout the opening statement, and I really don't understand. Perhaps this prosecutor is not really well versed. Maybe she hasn't done a lot of trials, but I would have been on my feet objecting to the argument in that opening statement, and I don't think they've done a really good job here. So the overall theme of the opening statement is he didn't know the gun was loaded. There's a reason people say that when they're making a point about something that didn't happen, right? The problem with this is it doesn't forgive the pointing of the gun, as I've said before, and it doesn't forgive doing a safety check. Now, there is conflict in the evidence here, and they'll get an opportunity to cross-examine and do all of this stuff and basically bring out the facts that they think help them. But this opening statement is, I think, really going to put off anybody on that jury who has ever handled a firearm and who knows what the rules of gun safety are. If you know what the rules of gun safety are, hearing that they are suddenly suspended, that they don't exist in the same universe as a movie set, is preposterous. And that's what he's arguing throughout this. This is a movie set. This is the land of magic. Well, the problem with that is magic doesn't work. It doesn't overcome physics. It doesn't overcome the explosive propulsion of a projectile down the barrel of a firearm. There are reasons why we have rules about gun safety, and Helena Hutchins' tragic death is just one more of those reasons. And I believe, and I think the evidence is going to show, that all he had to do was point it away. He didn't have to point it directly at her. And again, he did have the trigger depressed. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case because that's what the evidence is. A Pieta will not fire without the trigger being pulled. And even the supposed destructive testing didn't actually show that the gun would fire in some other manner. Now, I do want to point out just a little bit about his comments about destructive testing.
And the owner's manual of this specific gun actually says that if you load it with a live round or any round in the chamber, in that last position, and you drop it like you see a cowboy in a movie, this type of old cowboy gun can accidentally go off. I don't remember hearing anything about that. The evidence will show that. So rather than trying to answer the question of what happened, they proceed with the destructive test. They eliminate the one item that could prove what Alex said and believed. They didn't offer him a chance to test the gun. They didn't take the gun apart before they broke it and destroyed it and look at its inner workings. They didn't turn on their videotape. They just destroyed it. Can't ever be tested in the same condition it was in that day. Won't ever allow Alex to show his truth. And the destruction of this gun that you will hear in this evidence is symbolic of this entire case.
So this is a frequent defense tactic. You criticize the investigation, you make it look like they jumped to conclusions, or you make it look like they focused on your guy because he happened to be standing in the same zip code. In this case, we know all of that stuff is just not true. But here's what I want to illustrate about the supposed destructive testing. The purpose of the testing was never to destroy the gun. He mentioned at the beginning about how the gun, if it's dropped, can sometimes fire. Well, the reason for that is because the hammer is such that if something causes the hammer to be struck in such a way that with enough force that it destroys the sear, then again, it will fire in that situation. What the FBI did was they tested the thing non-destructively initially, and it was only after Baldwin and that group raised issues with it that they went back and did this test of hammering the hammer. And basically what they do when they hammer the hammer is they take a rubber mallet and they hit the gun on various different places, finally hitting it on the hammer with a rubber mallet. Ordinarily, that does not break the sear and cause the gun to fire, but in this case, it did, which indicates that, the sear probably was not as strong as maybe it should have been, but up until the point that he hammered it with the hammer, it had held. And the FBI testing is very clear about that. It held up until that point. So this whole idea about destructive testing is an absolute red herring. It has absolutely nothing to do with the key issues in the case. Did he point a gun at Helena Hutchins? Was it a real gun? Did he have reason to know that it was a real gun? Yes, he asked for the biggest gun they had. And was he aware, certainly he must have been, that a real gun can cause real injury? He didn't test it, he relied on others, and that was foolish. But the biggest problem here is he didn't treat it like it was loaded, he didn't keep it pointed in a safe direction, he didn't make sure to not pull the trigger. All persons in firearms courses are taught to index their finger alongside the outside of the trigger guard. Basically, you put the finger on the side of the weapon and you don't put it down into the trigger well until you are ready to shoot. There's a good reason for that. A lot of times there's something called a sympathetic reflex. If you're holding a box of shells over here in your hand and you have your finger through the trigger well with the other hand and you drop that box of shells and you go to pick it up and you grip it, a lot of times you'll grip with both hands, and when you do, you'll set off the firearm where your trigger finger is through the trigger well. So there's all kinds of reasons why we take a great deal of care with firearms, because they do kill people. So the defense attorney here was very passionate. He made it seem like they're picking on Alec Baldwin. And I think if, I was on trial as Baldwin is, I would want somebody like this who was passionate, who was defending me. And in reality, he's come up with some pretty good points here. He's basically trying to distract from the key issues by picking up all of these other issues. Has there ever been an investigation that was perfect? No. Has there ever been a situation where mistakes were made and they harmed the value of the case? Sure. But in this particular case, we have multiple witnesses that saw what happened, and we have multiple witnesses who can testify to him pointing with the firearm at people. There is absolutely no reason to violate those rules of gun safety, because a blank can kill you just as easily as a live round if there's something in the barrel. That's what happened to Brandon Lee. Well, that's what I have for you this morning. Thank you so much for watching. If you have the opportunity, do me a favor and go out of your way and help somebody today. Do something nice for them. If you have any comments, drop them in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all those things we ask you to do. If you have anything that you would like to see me do or have any questions directly for me, you can send them to me by email. You can also do a video request, which essentially tells me what you want. If you put in the subject line of the email, video request, that alerts me that you have something you want me to do, and I can advance it to the top of the queue. After doing somebody a kindness, come on back down here tomorrow. We'll talk about something else fun. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.